Game Boy World, and this is Master Karateka. In Game Boy's first year on the market, we've seen a remarkable number of PC conversions of all things. Master Karateka makes the 5th PC to Game Boy port out of the 25 games released in Japan in 1989, full 20% of the console's early output. In this day and age, the idea of a PC to handheld port at least makes sense for indie games, a great many of which were inspired by console games, even Game Boy creations, to begin with. In 1989, however, it seemed somewhat counterintuitive. At the time, PC games didn't really do the action that consoles specialized in terribly well. Strategy? Awesome.
Reporting. Acknowledge. Reporting. Affirmative. Reporting.
RPGs? On PC? So good. Adventure games? Oh man, you have no idea. But platformers, fighting, action, so bad. You either had ancient systems like the C64 or ZX Spectrum straining to keep up with Mario and failing spectacularly, or else Amiga developers showing off their mad animation chops at the expense of fun. Not to say there were no good action games at all on PC, but this was a few years yet before Doom would change everything. Content segregation by platform was still the order of the day. Consoles struggled and overwhelmingly failed to present meaningful RPG and narrative-driven games, while PCs wheezed sadly when they tried to take on Nintendo and Sega directly. So it would seem the height of foolishness for the Game Boy, a dinky portable system whose graphical and processing capabilities paled in comparison to the worst TV console available at retail in 1989, to try and tackle PC games. Right? Well, maybe. But look at the PC ports available in Game Boy's early days. Hyper Lode Runner. BOXXLE. TETRIS. SHANGHAI. And now Master Karateka. All of these games share one feature in common. All 5 were about half a decade old by the time they reached Game Boy. Game Boy's PC ports reach back into the relatively ancient past of PC gaming to an era before fast, nimble action games became the order of day on consoles. Tetris, at a mere 4 years old, was the youngest of the quintet. However, Master Karateka, originally released in 1984 as Karateka for Apple II, was the most graphically impressive of the bunch. Even in 1989, in black and white on Game Boy, it featured some absolutely stunning animation. But then that was always Karateka's claim to fame. Designed as the debut creation of Jordan Mechner, who would go on to create Prince of Persia around the time the Game Boy launched, Karateka looked and played like nothing else that had come before it. The game essentially invented the belt-scrolling genre. As Pitfall was to Super Mario Bros., so was Karateka to Kung Fu Master or Altered Beast. The Karateka Prince of Persia connection should be obvious to anyone familiar with that more famous work. Mechner's love of silent films and classic swashbucklers shines through. Karateka didn't simply innovate with its sleek animation, but also with its emphasis on a narrative framework for the adventure. As the nameless karate warrior ventures into the enemy castle to save his beloved princess Mariko, the castle cuts to the evil warlord, Akuma, as he instructs his minions to intercept and defeat the hero. All that's really missing are scratchy title cards and a live piano performance. Karateka, being an older and admittedly more amateurish work, is considerably simpler than Prince of Persia. There's no platforming, no time limit, no elaborate fencing, no bizarre death traps. Instead, the adventure consists of a series of martial arts showdowns as the hero fights an increasingly deadly array of foes one by one. Eventually, you reach the big bad guy and, should you defeat him, win back the hand of poor Mariko. The gameplay is as simple as the premise. The hero, aka Mariko's true love, commands both high, middle, and low attacks for both punches and kicks, but the short range of punches makes them pretty much suicidal. To get close enough to land one, you need to move in close enough to your opponent to take a kick to the face. Theoretically, you can block attacks, but only the enemy AI seems adept at doing that. The hero also takes 2 stances through the game, a neutral stance and a combat form. While in his neutral stance, Mr. True Love can't fight, Approaching an enemy while neutral is basically giving them a free hit, and since there's only one life and no continues in Karateka, that's something you really can't afford. However, it's much faster to advance on the enemy fortress in this stance. Plus, it's the only way to be an honorable warrior. The only action you can perform while standing neutral is to bow to an approaching fighter. In his combat posture, however, the protagonist moves slowly and deliberately, but he can fire off both karate blows and soak up a few punches. As you fight, both you and your foes regenerate stamina, so the longer you let a fight drag on, the longer it takes to finish. Karateka almost certainly set the stage for countless Japanese walk-and-punch brawlers, such as the early Fist of the North Star games. Normally, it's hard to make a case that early Western games had a strong influence on Japanese design or vice versa, but Karateka is one of those early US titles a la Lode Runner, Spelunky, or Wizardry that took on a life of its own overseas. Hence, Master Karateka, which was released only in Japan. As for why it's called Master Karateka, well, this wasn't simply a port of the original Karateka. It's the same game, yes, but it has a few tweaks. The most significant of these was the new skill allocation system. No, not even the ancient Karateka was safe from Japan's newfound 8-bit obsession with role-playing games. At the outset of the adventure, you're given 6 points to invest in the hero's stats, and these have a significant impact on your performance. Crank up your strength, and you can seriously beat the tar out of the early foes in just a few hits, though of course you'll find yourself badly outmatched once you start facing off against speedy foes. At the beginning of each of the game's chapters, you're given 2 more points to play with for a total of 10 stat upgrades in total, which means it's impossible to simply steamroll the game, but this does give you the flexibility in theory to buff certain stats to better deal with particularly troublesome fights. Master Karateka also makes a few other changes, the most heartbreaking of which is the fact that Princess Mariko no longer one-shots you if you enter her chamber in a fighting stance. Not only does this game lose this classic Easter egg, it also turns back the clock on the deconstruction of the helpless damsel trope. But oh well. On the whole, Master Karateka is a workable port of the PC classic, lack of color and murder princesses notwithstanding, but it does feel terribly dated by the standards of 1989. Irem's Kung Fu Master was 4 years old by this point, and far more entertaining. The limited design and tactics of Master Karateka, along with a harsh penalty for failure, make for a brief, tedious, and difficult game. While I managed to make my way to the end of the second stage a couple of times while practicing for this recording, the boss at the end of the first chapter finished me off every time I tried to capture the game for this video, and there's no sense of reward for persevering. Perhaps not surprisingly then, the port was handled by infamous Ghost developer Tose, whom we've already seen a few times on Game Boy World, most of which have involved other PC to Game Boy ports. I guess they were just typecast. Meanwhile, the game was published by Shinsei Industry, a short-lived division of Bandai. Why it wasn't simply published by Bandai, who already had a Game Boy release with the Tose-developed Hyper Lode Runner, is a bit of a mystery. There's no real information about Shinsei Industry online, though the company appears to share a name with a corporate entity from the MACROSS anime series, which has seen a number of game tie-ins published by Bandai. Whatever the story behind its creation, Master Karateka was the most divergent rendition of the PC classic until just recently, when Mechner revisited the game for HD consoles and added considerable cinematic flair to it. But since this particular version never came to the US, it remains a historical curiosity, and hardly a loss. It's an underwhelming finale for Game Boy's first calendar year. For more PC games crammed into a 2-inch monochrome screen, keep reading GameBoyWorld.com.